to the French Revolution. All right. So some of the long-term causes we have already discussed are how monarchy was absolute. That is, monarchy enjoyed absolute 100% of power. So with that absolute power, they could do anything and everything. They believed in the divine right of the kings, that everything was God ordained. So who is anyone to question this absolutism enjoyed by the monarchy? So they could kind of wreak havoc. They could rule the way they wanted to. So that is that absolutism, absolute monarchy, or absolute power concentrated in the hands of the king and the courtiers. And then we know the unjust socio-political system, the three estates, how just 2% of the population commanded more than 80 to 90% of the wealth, and they did not have to pay any taxes, whereas 98% of the population were left to their own devices, and they had to pay all the taxes, they had to bear all the burden. And then poor harvest. And then what happened during those years, 1788, 89 and all, harvest was very bad. Weather conditions were adverse, no rainfall, whatever, because of which there was poor harvest. And when you have poor harvest, obviously farmers will not have any money. So they hardly had any money to pay the taxes. So they were becoming restless, and they were being punished, and they were being harassed. So when it is time for you to pay your money, obviously tax people, they come knocking and they keep on harassing you. So the same thing was experienced by these poor farmers. And at the same time, we are supposed to remember some great minds. They are called the philosophies. Philosophies, as in, it's a French word for philosophers. I mean, nothing much. It's just R is missing here. So here, philosophers, it refers to a whole lot of thinkers, a whole group of thinkers who came up. Most of them, they came from upper middle class. They came from the royal family. They were educated and they were free thinkers. So their thinking radicalized, or you could say, paved the way for the French Revolution. So you have people like Montesquieu, then Diderot, Voltaire, Hume. We'll be looking at all of them in detail and their contribution. So because of these new ideas and changing perspectives on things, they started questioning the way society was divided, the way the priests were running the church, the way the kings and the courtiers were behaving. So everything was kind of questioned, and even people started asserting their rights. So this was possible because of um, the presence of these thinkers, the great thinkers, the philosophers. And other factors are, as I told you, that sense, the spirit of revolution was there in the air. And we know great movements, when they happen at a go. Different parts of the world, they all behave. It's a very, you could say, interesting as well as a strange phenomena. For instance, if you look at the world today, you have many people, many countries, many you could say world leaders also moving towards majoritarianism, right wing politics. Yes or no? It's a kind of a movement wherein everybody is like that. Trump thankfully got thrown out, but you look at Great Britain, you look at Holland, you look at our own democracy. Though it is democracy, we know there is a shade of, you could say, authoritarianism as well as right wing politics. I mean, it's not a secret anymore. Fine. In the same way, during those days, you have successful other revolutions happening. Like, you have England's glorious bloodless revolution, and then you have the American Revolution. So this was in the air. Everywhere people were talking about freedom. People were talking about, or they were dreaming about a better future. And great ideas have that power to uplift people, and these ideas are not restricted and limited to one or two areas or one or two countries. It just spreads across the globe. So it was there in the air. These were some of the long term causes of the French Revolution. Now, looking at the short term causes, we've seen how the government had gone bankrupt. Too much of spending on all kinds of silly luxuries. And then these financial ministers, though they called for changes, it was not accepted by the king. King, and we know there was absolute power in his hand, so he need not listen to what the ministers would say, whatever. All right. And then um, there was a bill proposed. a bill which proposed that even the nobility should pay taxes. So in that way, the bankrupt state would be able to generate some revenue, because they could not get any more money now from the farmers, because they had become totally poor because of bad harvest, right? So where would they get the money? So they thought of taxing the nobility, but then the nobles themselves, they were sitting in the council, so they vetoed. They did not agree for the passing of this particular bill. So bankruptcy was one of the causes, and then there was this fear of famine. When you have crops failing, obviously people will go hungry, impoverished, and then these people were becoming more and more agitated. Who? The third estate. Now no money, businesses gone all bankrupt, with with no hope in sight, and people had started even dying. It was so bad, right? So when there's this anger and this kind of a fear, people become kind of restless. So that restlessness was there among the people. So people started fearing the worst. Now, again, this nobility would come and ask for more money. So that fear was there. And then, because of which they started hating people belonging to the first two estates. There were a couple of attacks on the nobility. So that resentment, that simmering rage was experienced by the third estate against the first two estates. And now again, when you're talking about, and about the third one, the estates general. Estates general refers to the meeting, a meeting that was called by Louis the 16. I hope you remember that, right? So for the past so many years, there were no meetings between the three groups. Three groups, as in the third one, they did not have any representation. Their problems and troubles were never ever listened to by the people in power. So finally, the king had to call this kind of a session with representatives from all the three estates, because the coffers, or finance had become kind of near zero. Without money, he could not really continue with the running of the country. So he had to call it. So now this was the beginning. You could say the spark was ignited with the calling of this particular meeting. So we'll be looking at what happened during the meeting. All right. Is it clear till now? Is it clear till now? Okay. So let's continue. So we're going to look at now what happened in this meeting that was convened by the King Louis XVI. So now this is the background to the whole meeting. It was the winter of 1788-89, and then these members of the three estates, they elected their representatives. So the meeting was called on May 5, 1789, and then there were representatives from the three estates. So the first and the second estate, they had 300 representatives each, and the third one had 600 representatives. Why more? Because they actually represented 98% of the population. Even then, 600 is very less, but at least they had 600 representatives. So now, this third estate, we know they were already battered. They did not have any money whatsoever. They were pushed to the brink, right? So now, these people, they badly wanted the constitution and the clergy and the nobility to pay taxes. They said, we cannot take it anymore. We are done. They totally destroyed, because the crops were destroyed and they didn't have any money. They did not even have food. So how can like the nobility and the clergy expect them to pay taxes? So they wanted the whole system to stop. Just a picture wherein you have the three estates. You have the clergy, the nobility, and the farmer. I mean the working class. So now there was this meeting, and there was voting conducted by the estate. So they had to decide about taxation, who will pay the tax. Now, estate 1 and 2, obviously, they came together and they wanted to vote against the third estate. The third estate actually wanted the first and the second estate to pay taxes. And the first two estates, they wanted to stop this. They wanted to stop it. So they started operating as a block. So they came together. Earlier, they used to have kind of fights and disagreements between them, that is estate 1 and 2. But then when they were faced with the prospect of having been asked to pay taxes, they came together. So no permanent enemies in politics. All right. So they were following that. So now third estate, they wanted that voting be by population. So they said, like, we are more in number. So um, great number of votes should be from the third estate. More, so voting should be by the population. That is representation depending on the number of people representing a particular estate. So if you look at that, then the third estate will have maximum number of votes, so their total votes would be much greater than the votes put together by estate 1 and 2. So now here you have the calculation, you can just have a look. So when you have estate 1 and 2 put together, even then their votes would be much lesser than what the third estate would command, just because of the sheer number of population represented by the third estate. So now the king, he was not willing to listen to this, obviously, right? Because he wanted to safeguard, um, you know, their convenience. He did not want the nobility or the clergy to pay taxes. So the whole thing was a stalemate. That is, nothing happened after that particular meeting. In that particular meeting, so what happened was, it was kind of a status quo. That is like, right now what is happening between the farmers and the government. Talks are going, but then the government is not at all relenting. It's not ready to listen. In the same way here also this happened. So you had estate 1 and 2 united as a block, and so you have estate 1 and 2 versus estate 3. So now what happened was, people belonging to the third estate, representatives from the third estate, they came together, and then they took an oath. So they called themselves the National Assembly. So now representatives from the third estate, they came together, and they declared themselves to be the National Assembly. And then what happened? Louis XVI, he was so angry, he threw them out. He threw them out of the meeting, and they were locked in a tennis court. They were put in a tennis court. They were not allowed to meet the other two estates or sit for a very, decent and respectable meeting. So they were simply locked out. So now the third estate, when they were put in this tennis court, what did they do? They came together, and they said that we are going to sit down and write a written constitution for France. Enough of monarchy. So now they became very bold, emboldened, because now they have nothing to lose. All they have was their life. So when you have nothing to lose, you become really bold, right? So that was the situation experienced by the third estate. So they called themselves the National Assembly, and they, got ready to write down the constitution, a written constitution for France. When things came to this extent, King Louis XVI, he agreed. He agreed, okay, let's meet once again, and then let us kind of put the whole thing, this question of taxes for voting. And voting can be done by population and not by, the earlier division, that is 300 belonging to the first two, and then 600 belonging to the third. So it won't be like that. There is this very famous painting by Jacques Louis David, Tennis Court Oath. You can find representatives of the people all coming together. Here you have the Tennis Court Oath. So they call themselves the National Assembly. And then what are they talking about? We have assembled, see, decrees that all members of this assembly shall immediately take a solemn oath not to separate and to reassemble wherever circumstances require, until the constitution of the kingdom is established and consolidated upon firm foundation, and that, the said oath taken, all members and each of them individually shall ratify this steadfast resolution by signature. So they came together, and this is kind of that oath saying that we are a new group, the National Assembly, and we are going to put it in writing. What a new constitution for France. These are some of the questions. I mean, we don't need to get into real detail. Why am I telling you all this in detail? Because it's only after this that we'll be able to look at the thinkers. And our textbook, as I told you, is quite you could say, written in scratches here and there. It's quite sketchy. So now this National Assembly. Louis XVI, obviously, the monarch, he did not want a written constitution because what would happen if there is a written constitution? He would have to follow that. He did not want to this. So now he was planning on the sly, that is, in secret, he was planning to use force against the National Assembly. He got his army. He was planning to attack them. So they got the news. The third estate people, they got the news. So what did they do? The people, they stormed the palace called Bastille, the palace at Bastille. That's called the fall of the Bastille, with which you have the beginning of the French Revolution. This happened on July 14, 1789. So before the king could come and attack the representatives of the third estate, the people themselves, they attacked the palace, fall of Bastille. So now what happened? Paris was the center. You had all these people, all the commoners coming together. They started organizing, their own governments. So you have people in Paris forming their own government. They called it the commune, and it was divided into small groups and factions, and they were trying to take control of the city of Paris. And what happened was the nobles were attacked, and then old records of feudal dues and taxes, which the poor people had to pay, all these records were seized and destroyed. And it was people on a rampage because they were pushed to the wall, and we know now they didn't have anything to lose. So they were really incited, and they were so frustrated. They were taking out their anger on people belonging to the first two estates, and many of them were murdered. Their houses were looted and tortured. Utter lawlessness was there. And then many of these noble people, they fearing for their own life, they knew if they stayed back in France, most of them would be attacked by the commoners. So they fled. They actually ran from the country, and they were called emigres, from which you have the word emigration, right? Emigre. So they emigrated. They ran for their life to different countries. And Louis XVI, he was forced to fly the new tricolor, or the flag of France, which was proposed by the National Assembly. So this is that flag. Now this is this palace, Tuileries Palace in France. It's in Paris. The king, he was made to stay there. Now under the National Assembly, there were some changes. So what were the changes? The guilds and the labor unions that were there already. All of them were abolished. Then special privileges given to the first two estates were abolished. Then there was a new constitution of 1791, which was drafted by the National Assembly, and there was something called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that everybody is equal and all that. Then equality before the law, everybody is equal before the law, and all this. Please remember, being a very patriarchal society, was done keeping in mind just men. All right, they were not really talking about women. And then many of the noble people, they left France, and they were known as emigres, as in immigrants. And then there were reforms in the local government, and then there was a new system of taxes, wherein taxes were based on the ability to pay. So if you had more money, you had to pay more taxes. So if you were poor, you were not forced to pay the taxes. So here again a picture of the hall of the National Assembly in Paris. The Declaration of the Rights of Man. This is similar to the English Bill of Rights and the American Declaration of Independence. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, guaranteed property rights, liberty, equality, fraternity, the centerpiece. Then right of the people to create laws, right to a fair trial. That is, if you're accused of anything, even you have the right to get a lawyer to fight your case. Then public office is based on talent or merit. Public office, as in all the government jobs, they're all based on talent or merit, not because you are somebody's daughter or son. No group exempt from taxes. That is, everyone had to pay taxes depending on the income they had. So in between, you also had some women also coming in, chiming in, asking for the rights of women. So we're not getting into details here. All we need to remember is, because women became emancipated, or they started asking for more freedom, it had far reaching consequences on the society of the time. And what was it? One was, women, they started, or they could inherit property. Earlier, women were not made property owners. It was always given to the son. The sons inherited property. So now women, when they started getting property, there was a change in the whole socio-economic system. Why? Because this weakened the feudal society, and it reduced the wealth among the upper classes, because earlier it would just go to the son. In that way, the wealth remained in the family. But now it would go to girls, women, who would be married to some other family. So, like that, the property would get divided. So, this weakened the whole feudal system. So, emancipation of women had far reaching consequences. And another was divorce. Divorce became much easier. Earlier, church would not give divorce, but now, because of this emancipation, divorce became easier, and this helped to weaken the church's control over marriage. So you can see the far-reaching consequences of the liberation of women on the French society. So now, this Parisian Commune, as in the local government of Paris, they feared that now Louis XVI would also try to escape from the country, because we have already seen many of the nobles, they escaped. So they thought that even the king would plan something of that kind. And then another thing was, they also doubted that Louis XVI would uh, take help from other countries to put down this revolution. And one reason was, Louis XV's wife, Mary Antoinette, right, the very maligned and infamed queen. She was actually the sister of the Austrian emperor. So Austrian emperor would obviously help his brother-in-law, right? Because the brother-in-law was in trouble. So the people also doubted, these people would come and attack um, the revolutionaries. So now, before that, what happened? A group of women, they attacked this palace at Versailles. They went there, and they forced the king to accept their new decrees, as in their new rules that were formed by the National Assembly. And this royal family, they had to spend their time in this particular palace, Tuileries Palace. They were actually imprisoned. It was like, uh, they were like prisoners in that particular palace, like what had happened in Kashmir, right? Under house arrest, like that, they were under palace arrest. So they stayed there for 6 years without being able to get out. So now, after that, what happened? With power in the hands of the people, National Assembly, they took away the church land. It was divided and sold to the peasants, and they created the civil constitution of the clergy. Earlier, clergy, they had their own law regulations, the papal law, if you remember, right, the canon law. So now they had to listen to the civil laws of the country, so they could function only according to that. So there was this new constitution, civil constitution for the clergy. It said that the church officials should be elected by the people, and they should be paid kind of a salary, so they are also like, you could say, employees of the government. So what happened under this situation? Majority of the church officials, priests, they ran away from the country, because they did not want to work like this, because earlier they were used to all kinds of luxury. They were rolling in wealth and living a very sinful life. Now they were being asked to give up all that, which was not agreeable to them. And all the feudal dues and tithes is that 1/10 of the money being given to the church, all that was stopped. And then all the special privileges of the first and the second estates were abolished. So now, this Constitution of 1791, what did it do? It tried to make France a limited monarchy. So earlier it was absolute. So it was going to be a limited monarchy. The king would be something like a rubber stamped king, merely the head of the state, like we have the king in UK now, right? The Queen Elizabeth. And what power does she have? Nothing much, but just you could say a celebratory rubber stamp ornamental kind of a figurehead. So likewise, the king was supposed to be mere head of the state, and the laws would be created by the legislative assembly. Feudalism abolished, And then there were undemocratic features also. It was not that this National Assembly was all 100% perfect. They had plenty of faults. So and some of the faults were like this: voting was limited to taxpayers. That is, if you pay tax, you can vote. Otherwise, you are not allowed to vote. And then offices were reserved. Offices, as in all jobs. All the jobs were reserved only for property owners. So this is kind of undemocratic. So a lot number of people were left out of the new system. So the new government was called the Legislative Assembly. And now the king, he was trapped inside that palace, if you remember, right? So he hated the whole thing, how he lost his absolute power, and then how the Legislative Assembly was regulating the church. And they tried to get help from Austria. And then they even tried to escape to Austria, but then they were caught by people. And then many of the nobles, they ran away. They went abroad as immigrants, and they thought that, other countries, the neighboring countries of France and all, they will help France because they were also monarchies. So other monarchies would obviously help France because they also did not want their own countrymen to become, democratic or overthrow the monarchy. The church, so the church official, they wanted the church land rights and privileges restored, and there were even Catholic people, Catholic peasants who actually supported the church. But this was not going to really happen. So you have the birth of new political parties depending on their perspective. So you call them the Girondists and the Jacobins. Here you have a picture of the royal family trying to escape to Austria, but then they were caught by some people at a place called Varennes. So now there was this opposition to the new government because we know France was a monarchy, and the many of the neighboring countries, they were also monarchies. So they felt threatened, and they really did not like what was happening in France. So there was this opposition to the new government. So other European monarchs, they feared that the revolution would spread to their own countries. And if you remember in France also what had happened, revolution had spread from America and UK. So now this could, this had the power effect to spread to other countries also. So that was feared by the European monarchs. So what happened is Legislative Assembly also knew this, that there was this threat that the other countries can attack them. So first they decided to strike. Attack is the best form of defense. So in that way they declared a war on Austria, but initially they failed. And then what happened? After the defeat in the war, there was an uprising by Paris radicals. Paris radicals, as in now within the new government itself, there were opposing forces. And if you remember, there were undemocratic forces also, which did not permit many of the very, very poor people to be a part of the whole system, right? Whatever was happening. So now you have, a lot of radical groups also coming in. So within the National Assembly itself, there was division. So in the uproar, this commune, they took control of Paris, and they were all, they could be compared to maybe the white supremacists that we see in America these days. So likewise, these people, they wanted universal male suffrage, as in they wanted all the male members the right to vote. And then later we know the French Revolution, how it kind of declined. It became kind of a democracy, whatever. But in the process, there was a lot of bloodshed. Many poor people suffered losses of life and whatever little they had, and it cannot be really justified. So on one hand, you have this glorious thing wherein you speak about liberty, equality, and fraternity. But what is the ground reality? Did it reach everyone? That's another question that many of the thinkers, and even later many of the writers, novelists would ask whether French Revolution was really that great. All right. So this is the whole, you could say, background to the whole French Revolution.